Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today, we'll be talking about TagoIO API and its best practice. For those who don't know me, my name is Marcelo. I am TagoIO content editor, and with me today, I have Vitor Lima, one of our developers. Right? So, here, guys, before we start, please feel free to present yourself on our chat. And if you have any questions, we have just opened our Q&A that is located above the chat. So you guys can ask your questions there. In the end of the presentation, we will have a moment to answer them now, right? And we are constantly having webinars, right? So if you don't want to miss them, please visit our events page so there you can see our schedule, right? So without further ado, please, Vitor.
Hey everyone. I'm Vitor Lima. I work as an application developer at TagoIO, and in this webinar, I want to talk a little bit about the best practice you can do when using the API. So I have quite a few slides here that I will go through first, and um, after that, I plan to do a little demo on the API, what you can do using the API, and a few a few comments on the analysis as well. So, starting here, what is the TagoIO RESTful API? The API is basically how TagoIO communicates internally between its services. So you will see the API being used on the analysis when you use the Node.js SDK or the Python SDK. And using the API, you can have access to creating devices or access data you have stored. You can even create dashboard, users, and basically any resource you have available inside your profile. It's manageable through the API. And the API uses the HTTPS protocol, and all the responses and the body format of this communication is in JSON format. The main way to authenticate through the API is by using a few tokens that I will talk about. And other documentation is available in the api.docs.tago.io. So let's talk a little bit about the tokens. TagoIO has a few tokens available for authentication under several different services that we provide. The most important one is the account token, also known as profile token. This is a token you will find under your profile settings. And this token is generated every time you log into your account, but you can also generate a token to use in your analysis or external services that you have. This token provides accessibility to basically all the resources. You can even retrieve the other tokens by using the account token. So this is very important token that you will be using. With it, you can create files, create devices, retrieve the device tokens from your devices. You can manipulate your run settings, access your buckets, erase the data you have stored. You can also access your dashboards, generate notifications, create actions, edit actions, etc. Another token that probably many of you are already familiar is the device token. And the device tokens has much less permissions. It can only access one device and is mainly use it to get data or store data or even delete data from the device. There is a few other API endpoints that you can use as well, like getting configuration parameter, which is very helpful if you plan to have some kind of downlinks using HTTPS, but not using LoRaWAN service, for example. Next token I can talk about is the analysis token. So this is much less used, I believe. you will only be using the analysis token when you want to send SMS or email through the analysis, or when you want to run the analysis in external way, which is by running the analysis directly from your machine. And last one is the network token. Also, not much used. It's only when you want to do custom integrations with other services. So, for example, if you have a LNS, Layer 1 network server that we do not support, and you want to make the support by yourself, you can create a network. You have access to this network token. And what this network token does is that it gives you an endpoint where you can get the device token from any device from TagoIO that was created under your network. And you only need to provide the serial and the authorization from the owner's account. So I believe with this I cover all the tokens we have available. And we'll do a little demo using these tokens so you can get more familiar with the API. But I want to go to another important concept when you are using the API, which is the throughput limit. So, what is this limit that I'm talking about? So, this is the limit of calls that you can do or perform to the API simultaneously. So let's imagine it that you are getting a list of 100 devices and you plan to add the data to each one of these devices. If you do perform all these queries all at once, you will probably run on this limit because TagoIO does not accept too many requests from the same source in very small amount of time. So the best way for you would, of course, be to split these in intervals of 200 milliseconds, something like that. But let me explain this properly. We have here a few examples of calls that, ways that developers do perform calls to the API. The first one is that you do perform a call to the API sequentially, which means, for example, you go to each device one by one and add your data and expect the API to respond, and then you move to the next device. So you go one by one, like a simple queue. And this, of course, will not run into any problem. TagoIO fully supports this way of performing requests. The second example here is that you do these multiple API calls all at the same time. So you have, in this example, just four, but you only see this problem if you are doing something like 1,000 requests at the same time. And you can see that in this example that you have three requests that you didn't have any error, but you see an error in one of them. And this is what I'm talking about, this limit. So most of the calls, of course, will work, but you can expect if you are doing everything simultaneously for some of them to not work or you have an error. And this error usually comes described as an operation timeout or even a throughput limit error that you see as a response from the API. So, what is the best way to do these calls if you have the situations where you need to call the API several times? The best way would be to create a queue where you perform two or more requests, like 10 requests in a queue simultaneously, while all the other requests waits for this 10 to finish, so you go to the next 10. And this is the next example I have here in this diagram here or page. So you can see you have two queues, and you have one API call going one behind the other. So when finish, the other API call is done. So let me give you some examples in the code. So I have here a Node.js code. It's just a quick cut of this code. So in this first example, you can see a, a carry doing sequentially. So in this code, we get the list of devices, and then we use the for loop to iterate through each device. And every time we do that, we insert data to them. This is the example where you don't face a throughput limit, but it also takes longer for your analysis to finish because it's going one by one. So in the second example, I don't believe I moved the page here. So here you have the first example. We go one by one. And the second example here is where you perform all the queries at once. So in this code, we use the array method called for each. So it go through all the devices at once and insert the data to them. In this example, we are not skinning well because as more devices you have, more probably that you get an operation timeout error facing this throughput API limit. For the last example here is our example creating carries of 5 at once. And in order to do that, we are using the async library. So you can check the documentation of this library if you are interested in knowing how this library works. So the queue function here, which you can see here in the start queue equals async.queue. We provide a function to be called in each interactions, just for you to understand this code. And then we specify the number of iterations that we can have simultaneously. Then we can push our device and that object to this queue using the for each method. So this is not a problem because at this point, none of these carries had been performed yet. We are just editing to the queue. And when the queue starts to work, it works on each device as soon as we start to add the data to the queue, and it goes in queue in lots of 5, doing this request by 5 and 5. And we in this situation, we don't get any throughput issue or operation timeout error. So I hope you get a bit a little of glance and direction on how do you avoid this kind of problem when in situations where you need to perform several requests and you don't want your application to mess up. Okay, now I want to share my screen here, and I plan to go a little bit about over the documentation here. So I am at the API docs.tagoio.io. This is our documentation on the API, and everything that you can do using the API is documented here. We have some sections divided by which kind of token you can use. So in the documentation, currently we have only the device token, profile token, and network token. But if you go to the SDK documentation, you probably will see documentation over all these tokens and what you can do with them, including the analysis token. Analysis token is just not included here because it just don't make sense to do this using HTTPS requests. Usually, you want to perform this any of the operation that uses analysis token using the SDK inside an analysis. And it's good to remember at this point that Everything that you can do in an analysis, or it works the same way for the API. You can perform on the API and you can perform in the SDK. You will see these operations available in both documentations. So, talking a little bit about this documentation here. So, if you go to device and get data, you will see the URL that we need to use to perform our request. I will have a quick description of what this request does. In some case, there are instructions on things that you need to do before or after use this request. So pay attention to the description. Then we have the headers, which are very simple to use. You just specify your header with your token. So if it's a device token or a profile token or a network token, you need to get from the correct place. Then we have the carry params, which usually is used to apply some filters. So in this case, for get data, we can filter by quantity. We can get details like when the data was created and some other additional fields that we have available from the API. We can change the origination. We can skip some amount of data and gets the next data after 15, for example. And we also can filter the variables. Of course, there are some filters that I believe is missing here, like filtering by group or filtering by value, but I believe you got the point. Uh, in the code example here, you can see we have a core example that you can just copy and use in your terminal or import in your Postman or software that you use to perform API requests. And also have a example response. And you can expect to see this for all the endpoints that we have available in this documentation. In some cases, we have more than one example here. So I can click on this and get an example for retrieving the last data from a specific variable, or get the maximum number in the value for a specific variable as well, and filter by date. So some of these endpoints, you will see more than one example. Uh, okay, so we have the devices that is manipulating data inside the device. And you will also notice that you can perform some of these requests using the profile token. So so you will see devices under profiles here, and you will notice the digits. I believe it's under. Let me check quickly. I'm not sure why it's not here, but you can actually perform get data, send data, and edit data using the device token. Just not find easy here, but this is something you can do. Other than that, you can list your tokens, you can get configuration parameters, uh, create mutable device or immutable devices. So the list is very long of what you can do. I hope you take your time to explore this because it just open more options for you to use TagoIO outside of the TagoIO environment. You can use a third party service to connect to TagoIO, get your data, get your list of devices, and get more configurations you have stored. Uh, Even performing changes like updating device naming, creating device tokens with UI or serial, or applying tags because tags is very important when creating applications inside the platform. Okay, so let me open my Postman here and let's perform one of these carries so you can understand how this works. In this case, I plan to get my list of devices so you can start to see this. And in order to do that, I will copy the URL here on the top. The Postman here is a software that you can use to perform API requests to any API. And there is other kind of software. You can use any that you are more familiar. But it's very simple. You just need to copy what we have here in the documentation and place on the correct places here in the software. But I will explain a little bit as I go through each step. Um, so I did copy the endpoint. I also noticed here that this is a get endpoint. So I need to change the type of request here. So we have get, post, etc. So pay attention to that. Then we have a header call authorization. So let me copy, go to headers and create the key authorization. I also need to provide a profile token. In order to do that, I can go to my TagoIO account. I need to go to my profiles. And under the tokens here, I can get any of these or I can choose generate a new one here. So let me copy this one that will expire in 3 months and place it here. And just by doing that, I believe we can already perform these requests. And that's because all these parameters are optional, as you can see here. So it's you choose if you want to send these parameters or not. So if I perform these requests, I'm already receiving some data here, which is my list, the list of devices I have in my account. So you will notice that the example response here has more fields, and that's because we need to provide uh, the in our call which fields we want to receive, and we can do that by using the params here. Let me close this a little bit, and we need to specify which fields we want to use. So in the SDK, you inside the analysis, the field is an array, and for the API, it actually works the same. So you need to create kind of an array here for getting all the fields you want to use. So have an array for position, first position, second position, third position, and go on. And we can specify that we want to receive the name. For example, we want also to retrieve the connector, the network. We get more fields here, created at, and press send. And now you can see I have connector, network, and created at time. And I don't think we have here all the fields you can get, but in this case, I want to give you just a tip to go to the device info here, device information, so you can see all the fields that you can get from the API. You can have connector, ID, last input, name, network, profile, visible, type, data retention. So all fields that you can get from the API for a device list in the list endpoint. Another thing we can do here is to filter. So we can filter, for example, if device is active or not, or can filter by a connector. So let's do a simple filter by connector. In the SDK, just to mention again, this would be a JSON. So you can see the same way of creating a JSON. So when you are using the carry strings here, so you get I understand it may kind of confused sometimes because this is array, but when you want to do like a JSON in the char strings, you just enter the name of the field here, and API will understand this is a JSON. So filter connector, and if you want to create, for example, a JSON with an array, you can do this. And this is how you do for tags when you want to filter by tags using the API directly. So by connector, I can pass this connector here, and I can test it and see that we only have one device with this connector. And this go on, and the same behavior, you can expect to the same behavior for any of the lists. I believe the info directory requests with no much filters are very easy to do, and that's why I wanted to show you how to perform with the list, because I believe this is the more complex one. All the other is very simple to understand and very simple to perform. Okay, I believe I'm done here with the API. Let's move on to the analysis so we can take a quick look on how this looks on the analysis. I have a test analysis here. Let me load the hello world example. Okay, so I have the hello world example here. And this is a very cool example where we can just press run here and see a few things showing up in the console. I will not explain much about the analysis here because I believe there are other webinars that go through all how analysis works and what I'm doing here. So I want to cover more on the SDK side when you are using the TagoIO SDK. So in this case, you have the SDK, I believe it's js.sdk.tago.io, which is the documentation on the SDK. And you can see here from the sidebar all the classes that we have available in the SDK. There are also the UTIOS. UTIOS is not actually a class, this, because this is why it's looking different, but it has a couple of utilitarian functions that you can use. And the difference between the UTIOS and the classes is that the classes you need to instance with the new, oh, sorry, need to instance with the new and pass some parameters, but the utils you only call utils.m to JSON. You don't need to instance this utilitarian library here. But I will show you how this works in the analysis in a few seconds. So taking a look here in this quick example, you can see you can import any of these classes from the SDK. So in this case, I'm importing the device, as you can see here from the sidebar. And it expects to receive some parameters. Probably all of these classes will expect to receive a token as parameter. And we can quickly see this by clicking on the device here and go to the constructor. So constructor expects to receive the device constructor params. And if you click on it, you can see that we have token and region as a parameter of this JSON. And region is optional. For now, you don't need to care about the region. This is more something for the future. So let me go back here. So with the device, we can access the send data that we saw in the API, get data, and you can actually see this from here. So you have all the methods that you can use, delete data, edit, get. You can perform a streaming if you are outputting a lot of data. You can get the configuration parameters. You can change the configuration parameter to red and several others functionalities here. And usually you have this quick example how to perform with this method. So you instance the device and use the delete data. And you can see here we have the option to send all the filters that we want. So just to compare with the example I've done in the Postman, we'll go to the account. Under the account, we have the devices, properties, which is the same as here from the API. So you have profile, devices. So moving back, go to devices. We can click devices here. And now we have all the methods that is available for devices. One of them is the list. Let me click on this. And the list is the same thing. You can perform the carry and send all the parameters that I mentioned in the Postman. Let me do this quickly on the analysis here so you can see how it works. So first thing I want to do here with the account, with the analysis, is to import the account class. And now I want to instance the account class. And the account class expects to receive token. And let me get the token here from my Postman. Okay. And with this token now, I can get my device list. And it expects to receive a parameter called device carry. So let's open, create. And when inside any JSON as a parameter, you can press control space and it will open this. These are tips of what you can pass as a parameter here. I think this is very useful. So we can filter by fields. Actually, we can carry the fields. We can pass a filter, order by, a page, the amount, and even say if you want to receive the book name or not. So let me enter the fields I expect to receive here. And this is an array. And if you do have question if it's array or not, you can hover your mouse on the parameter, and you can see here it says an array of field names, and also gives you all the possible parameters that you can enter here. So I can get the name, I can get the visible parameter, I can press Control Space to see all the other parameters that I can get. So let's say I can get the last input. I also want to get the network, and I believe that you already got the point here, but I can also get the connector, and you will just go through all the fields you want to receive. Another thing we can do is to filter. So filter is a JSON. So over the mouse, if you have questions, in this case, it's getting actually this basically the same thing as the fields here. So if that happens, go to the documentation here. You can click here in the in the device carry to see what is this object. You can go to filter, and here you can see what it expects to receive as a filter. So you can filter by active, by bhakti, by connector, by IG, by name, etc. So let's move back. Let's say I want to get only a device with the connector, which connector I used it here, this one. We can perform the same filter. And then I can log this to my console. I just erased the other console logs. Now I can press save and run. Okay, you can see I received an array with my freezer, and if I do remove this filter, you will see I can get all my devices. Yeah, I hope that helps you understand the API, what you can do with it. You have some instruction on how to use. Um, now, I expect you to take your time and explore this option, as I do think it opens a lot of possibilities for your application. So, Marcelo, I believe we have the Q&A now.
Perfect. So thank you, Victor. Amazing presentation. Right, it's always good to review our API in details. Right. So guys, don't be afraid to send questions for our Q&A. Right. And before we jump to it, let me remind you that this webinar is being recorded. Right. So if you missed any part of it, or you just want to rewatch it, we will send you for you the link after the webinar. And you can also watch it on Vimeo or YouTube. Okay. So for now, we don't have any questions. Look at that. That's new for us. So if you guys don't have questions, thank you, Vitor, for the presentation. Thanks to everybody for joining us. It see you all at our next webinar. Right. So stay tuned. Reminding you guys that you can follow us on our events page. You can subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss any events or anything about the IoT world, right? And if you don't have an IoT TagoIO account, it's pretty easy to create one, right? And if you need help, you can always schedule a live demo with us. It's free. So that for today, that was it. Thank you all. Bye.